Welcome back, everybody, to the main stage. We're going to be talking cybersecurity. Just a reminder to download the app for Ignite Space onto your phones, and on the app you've got a full opportunity to add in any questions you would like for the panels coming up today into the live Q&A section, and also you can join the little network of discussion points. As well, make sure that you can take your notes, email them to yourselves afterwards, and keep the discussions going. Coming up on this stage, in about an hour and a half's time, we have Daria Dasher Fulchenko from Astro Agency. This is a female majority space supply business doing extraordinary things. She is an inspiring speaker, and she'll be up on this stage at 4:45. But now, we are very lucky to be joined for our panel on cybersecurity. So when is the right time to consider cyber? I'm guessing the NHS and various other people wish it was last week. But that aside, please welcome your panel. You have, at the far end, I'm going to say it beautifully now, Dr. Sharon Lemack-Vincier. I was going to say Français, but you don't want it as posh as that. Space Cyber Lecturer at the University of Strathclyde. We have Simon Agas, Director of Risk Aware. And we have Peter Deff, Director of CGI. And I'm delighted to say that Melanie Clift, who appears on many panels, is chairing this one, thank goodness. Director for Defence and Security at the Satellite Applications Catapult. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, awesome. So delighted to be here today. I'm Director for Defence and Security at the Satellite Applications Catapult. As you'd expect, with a job title like that, I am focused in on cyber to quite a big degree, but really this is something that cuts across both civil, defence and commercial as well, particularly as we start to rely more on commercial assets in a very large degree, right through to critical national infrastructure. And I think the UK space sector is evolving rapidly. We're faced with new and often invisible challenges when it comes to cyber risk management. It's important to consider that the impact from a cybersecurity event could have the same impact or somewhere along the scale as a space debris impact or even a space weather impact in terms of knocking out capability. There's a lot of very interesting material on this on the web. I wouldn't suggest it for bedtime reading. It's not going to have you falling asleep anytime soon, but things that talk about the impact of not having access to space, really quite thought-provoking stuff. So I'm going to hand across to Peter to introduce himself and give his initial thoughts on the topic, followed by Simon and then Sharon. Then we'll have a discussion and open up the floor to questions as well. Peter, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Mel. Yes, I'm Peter Deff. I'm a director in the Secure Space Systems part of CGI. So, as you might imagine, my job involves looking at space and cybersecurity quite a lot. All of the projects that I've worked on in space have all had a cybersecurity element, as any space project should do. But I started off looking at the secure side on ESA Galileo, which is a large GNSS system, so you might imagine security was really embedded in that. And then a number of other projects, including working on the Aurora system for UK Space Agency and MOD. Again, that's part of our critical national infrastructure in terms of space domain awareness, so we've seen people paying a lot of attention to cybersecurity there. However, I've worked on a few other projects as well, where I must admit I tend to sort of bang on the door a little bit. You come in at the start, you say, are you looking at security by design? Are you thinking about things in the earliest phase? And the thing that I've been saying for many, many years is that the sooner you embrace cybersecurity at any point on any project, in particular in space projects, the better and the more money that you will save. Always understand your risks, and if you pick up on those cyber risks later on and you have to do mitigations later on, I've never seen that save a project money. That will always cost a project more. So hopefully, if people take nothing else away from that panel, when to engage, it's at the earliest possible phase of any space mission that you're doing. Okay, Simon?
Hi there, I'm Simon Agas. I'm Business Development Director at RiskAware. Now, RiskAware is an actionable intelligence solutions provider. We've been around for about 20 years, and we provide data science, machine learning, AI, modeling and simulation, software engineering kind of solutions for our customers. Our customers are generally kind of governments, NGOs, charities, and prime contractors. And we work in the domains of, unsurprisingly for this panel, cyber defense, space domain awareness, chem biodefense, wearable technology. And for me, my background, my academic background is in Earth observation, but I've also spent a lot of time working on space applications and the use of space data, and more recently in space domain awareness and kind of threats to in-orbit systems. And I think we're here on this panel to talk about cyber as a threat to space systems. And we tend to think about threats to satellites as being things like the traditional ones, space debris, space weather, because they're generally the more exciting ones. But in terms of the probability of something happening to either your company or to one of your systems, a cyber threat is far more likely to happen. And it's actually something that, the good news is it's something you can do something about. The other one, so space debris and in-orbit collisions or space weather, there are, as companies, as individual organizations, there's limited things we can do about those. But in terms of cyber, we can all play our part. Everybody in this room and everybody in the industry has their own role to play in defending our businesses, our interests in space. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dr. Sharon McVinseer, and I'm an academic at Strathclyde University. I predominantly teach entrepreneurship, and I come from a kind of entrepreneurial perspective when looking at cybersecurity in the commercial space sector. So not a space background. My background is that I was an entrepreneur, and I set up a technology company in 2004, 2005 on online streaming. So way back then, people thought I was crazy that in the future you'd be watching TV on your laptop or your phone. And I developed streaming technology, and I was able to sell that technology to be able to use online content and develop new markets. So for me, when I got into the space sector, I was like, well, some of the challenges that the technology or the sector's facing harks back a lot to what the challenges that I was facing as an entrepreneur using online streaming technology or trying to develop that technology in 2004, 2005. Back then, we were looking at secure by design. We were thinking about the future of the internet, social media, and we're looking at all those challenges. So when I started to think about space as an emerging economy and a new domain, I was like, well, a lot of these challenges we've faced already, and actually, can we take that learning and think about it within the space sector? So for me, it's about how do we enable entrepreneurs to actually realise their ambitions and actually get the most out of the market by making sure that you're secure from the outset. Because we can look at the kind of online streaming market, and we know that had we put in secure by design principles at the beginning, then we would have had a more robust economy. So I'm really looking at cybersecurity through that lens. I've developed educational courses for executives because I also teach at the International Space University in Strasbourg, and for me it's about making sure that executives are also aware of cybersecurity. So we need board and executive level understanding of cybersecurity in the commercial space sector. So my research is also looking at cybersecurity. How can we empower and enable entrepreneurs to make sure that their innovation can actually move into the marketplace and be successful? So it's very much taking it from an entrepreneurial perspective.
Thanks, Sharon. So it sounds like cyber needs to be seen as an enabler, not as something that holds you back, something that could trip you up for sure if you don't have the right level of security, but really having all bases covered, well, as much as is humanly possible on the cyber side, will enable your business to reach its potential and shouldn't stop SMEs or an entrepreneurial approach. And just to kind of articulate the threat as well as we can, what is it specifically around space that is so difficult from a cyber perspective? And am I right that really maybe 80% of the space value chain isn't on orbit? So we need to be looking terrestrial, possibly even sub-sea, in terms of where the threat surface pans out to. But really, what is it from a space perspective we need to be thinking about when it comes to cyber?
UK Space Agency recently asked CGI to do a report into the UK National Risk Register, and in particular looking at the intentional disruption of space-based assets. So we looked at cyber attacks, we looked at physical attacks, including nuclear and inter-satellite weapons, and we looked at electromagnetic attacks. And one of the things that we found really interesting when we went out to the UK space community is how likely they think it is that they will be attacked. Most UK space companies that we interviewed said they expect, or it's very likely, that their in-space assets will be attacked, that their link segment will be attacked, and that their ground systems will be attacked. They expected cyber problems to emerge both in the value chain, in terms of the supplier base, and in terms of direct attacks. They expected there to be phishing attacks about what they've seen. In fact, the only segment where we interviewed people where it wasn't either expected or very likely that they will be attacked was the launch segment that was only likely to be attacked. And to be honest, and I think they're right. And I was talking to a defence specialist last week, and I said, what is it about the UK space sector in particular that means we are so likely to be subject to a cyber attack? And he said, the thing about the UK is that there's quite a lot of kudos to some countries and organisations in taking out a space asset. But some of them are a bit frightened of taking out an American asset in terms of what the retaliation might be. And you've got these non-government organisations and these governments thinking, I'd quite like to get the kudos of taking out a space asset. I won't take out an American one. Where will I go next? I'm going to look at a UK asset and see if I can take that out and almost demonstrate my capability, but not be as worried about the comeback. So even within the space sector, the UK space sector actually has potentially a higher likelihood of cyber attack than other places as well.
That's a sobering thought. Even without the ability to attribute so easily?
And again, there's the ability to attribute. So if you launch a nuclear weapon, or if you do an anti-satellite attack, or even some of the electromagnetic attacks, you're going to be able to see where some of these things come from. But I think what you often see within the cyber domain or the defence domain, there's plausible deniability. So you will either have some non-state actors who will claim to do stuff, or some people who want to be able to do stuff. They can equally say they haven't done it, but equally be known within the circles that they have done it as well, if that makes sense. So you've got the ability to both claim the credit of taking out a satellite and as well deniability to try to say, well, don't come back to us with maybe a ground-based attack on that basis.
The repercussions are difficult. How about you guys? Anything space-specific?
Can I ask a wee question? Do you know how you said you went out and you did some research recently? Was that about perceptions? Was that with SMEs or primes? Or who was it that you were speaking to in terms of that?
So we went out to some of the bigger operators in the UK space ecosystem, and we interviewed them, and we asked them how likely did they feel their assets would be to be attacked for the different segments in terms of space, link, ground, launch, and that was the feedback that they gave to us.
So they said that it was highly likely that they felt that they were a target for a cyber attack. So what was the kind of action? So if they were saying we're aware of this and we realise that there's a high percentage of an attack, what were they then saying that needs to be done? Or
Well, yeah, and I'll be honest, the nature of the research that we were doing didn't go into mitigations. And one of the things that I would always say is that the mitigations depend on the mission and they depend on the company. If you're developing a defence mission, your level of protection that you might need may be different than if you're a university launching a science mission. It's all about having an appropriate awareness of your risks and then having appropriate mitigations so that you're happy to own those risks.
So just to follow that question through, so it sounds like the understanding of risk was very strong, or the understanding of likelihood, but in terms of what they would do next, so to speak, understanding what they needed to do, there wasn't that understanding.
I think it would depend on company by company. And to be fair, we haven't asked them the next threat, although I won't attribute this. 2 years ago, I had a company and I said, what's your space cyber posture like? And they said, we know what it is, and it's really bad. And they felt comfortable telling that to me. And, I'm not, and unfortunately, that was because the people who knew don't necessarily have anything to do with it, and because missions take a long time. And we all know that missions can take 10 years from start to finish. The view of the risk 10 years ago isn't necessarily the view of the risk now, but these satellites are flying now.
So this, I think there was a point made earlier about the need to manage the risk for cyber to the very top. So it should be C-suite, probably CEO really, and there should be continuity of responsibility, I guess, for it, because then it gets taken seriously, not lost at an operational level, whether it's possible to do something about it.
Definitely, and even another UK company, I went and they were listing all of the suppliers that they were looking, and I went up to their project manager. I said, that's a really interesting list of suppliers. CGI could do a lot of that. Where's cybersecurity on your list of suppliers? And they said, oh, I'm not sure. I said, oh, who handles cybersecurity for you? And they said, oh, I'm not sure. And so even some of the project managers on a UK space mission hadn't assumed that that's something they needed to supply, and they wasn't actually sure who was responsible for doing that in their company.
So hopefully things like Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus will be helping to plug that kind of gap. Simon, did you have anything from a space-specific perspective on cyber, or anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, so I think, in terms of cyber, and space. So space is now so critical to everything that we do. It's fully embedded into our way of life, and so that in itself is a risk, and so cyber then becomes should be right at the top of the agenda, especially in terms of satellites. It's now a very competitive market. It's a global market. We can't get away from that. So there's motive and there's incentive there for people to do things. Obviously, with the political climate, there's also incentives and motives to do things to disrupt our critical national infrastructure. Ultimately, satellites. They have to have wireless communications. You can't just go and fix one. You can't just plug a cable into it. So you can't have a completely air-gapped network, given that you have to do wireless communications to control it, or to talk to it, or to receive the data from it. And it's, like we said before, it's a very low barrier to entry. Jamming is now is considered a cybercrime, and you can buy a jammer. I had a look before, so I could buy one of Amazon for $15.99 and jam a GNSS signal. That's considered a cybercrime, and so you can immediately disrupt a space asset or somebody's ability to use the data that it provides, and so it should be right at the top of people's priorities list. And like we said before, it's something that's not always considered, and it really should be. Cyber should be a standing agenda at a board level. So it is discussed at a board level. There should be designated security officers who is on top of cyber and is named, so that they can, when you're working on projects or when you're working on, you have somebody to go to who is responsible for ensuring that things are secure and that cyber is considered and is always up there with everything you do. So yeah, I think it is critical space. It's critical for every industry that we have, but it is becoming more and more critical for space, and should be something that's absolutely considered as soon as a company is set up, and should continue and maintain that through the growth of the company.
So I think we have the answer to our panel's question quite quickly, which is when should we be looking at cyber? And it's kind of immediately, yesterday, and every day going forward. As companies scale, are there step changes, or are there things that need to be done differently? How do we grow? How do we move? How does cyber move as a company grows, so to speak? So managing that. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you need to go a couple of steps back. So for the entrepreneurs here, there's a real shift change in the environment. What we're seeing is insurance companies are now being very selective in how they're going to underwrite your businesses. So they're very much becoming very cyber aware, and they've got a bit for want of a better description, the insurance companies have got a bit fed up waiting on the sector determining what the norms and standards and behaviours are. And so the insurance sector are beginning to determine what they believe are going to be the norms and standards and behaviours in terms of cyber security. So for an entrepreneur in a business, you're going to have to think about cyber security and resilience to be able to get your insurance policies and premiums. And what we're also seeing on a global kind of scale is investors are also now deciding, well, actually, this is a high value sector. So what we want is to be assured that if we're investing in your company, that you've thought about cybersecurity and resilience before we even get to the growth of our market. So I think there's a number of steps. We need to think about secure by design, and we throw that terminology around a lot, but I think we need to kind of nail down what that means, secure by design. We need to think about how that gives you strong foundation so that you can get the investment and the insurance before you even get to growing and scaling, or even thinking about the kind of different attacks or the type of kind of threat actors.
So that's an example of kind of self-regulation, if you like. It's a commercial driver for something that's a security risk, effectively, if the insurance industry are now demanding it, for example. Yeah,
because at the moment, so when we're talking about the cyber attacks here and the different threat actors, we don't have any global cyber security laws, right? We've got different types of frameworks and different nations that are wrestling with frameworks as well. Fundamentally, if you're attacked, it's going to cost you a fortune to try and bring your business back online or deal with your losses. And then if you're trying to think about enforcement or getting a return for that loss, then that means that you're taking time out of your business, you're still trying to waste time, or not waste time, but you're trying to pursue those actions, right? So actually thinking about secure by design and embedding it in the beginning, rather than thinking about frameworks and laws that are we're still years away from getting these embedded into the sector and grow. So I think, self-regulation, and then you're at least making sure that you're keeping the insurance company and the investors happy to some extent as well.
I think that actually begins to answer one of the questions you've had from the audience, where Paul Fev has asked, do customers care sufficiently at the outset, or do they only act if they've experienced a disaster? But I think what you're saying there is because it pushes the cost up within the business, which will push the cost up to the customer, that they will eventually care, or quite quickly care. But any other thoughts on that? Do customers care at the outset, or is it only if something goes very wrong? Simon, do you want to have a...
Yeah, so, from my experience now, risk-aware, probably slightly, because we work predominantly in the defence sector, although kind of space is a key part of what we do. But so from our perspective, yes, it's customers care from the outset, and one of the first things we have to do is make sure that we have all the right certification and we've got all the right standards in place to be able to do that. I think kind of going back to what you're saying in terms of scaling as well, it's as an SME. it doesn't need to be seen as there doesn't need to be a huge overhead to this, and I think there are things that you can start to do. You can start to do things straight away. I mean, I think even just adopting cloud technologies in your everyday networks and things like that can really help. Why try and do something yourself when actually there are businesses out there that are doing it and rolling it into the way that they provide services. So yeah, I mean, I think. To answer your question, though, I think yes, customers do care, and I think it is becoming more and more it's becoming up the agenda, and people are asking upfront, what certification do you have, what standards do you adhere to in terms of cyber, and as a small business, it's our job to ensure that we meet those.
Sharon,
just one of the challenges that we're facing is language. So. Some of my research has identified that there's a disconnect at the intersection between space and cyber. So it's really hard for entrepreneurs to understand what it is that they've actually got to do. And it's really hard for the sector to understand what this means because there's a disconnect between language. So we really need to be very careful in terms of terminology, because we've even done it here on this stage and assuming that everybody in the audience understands. So we've talked about cyber essentials, we've talked about secure by design, but actually we've not explained what they are to you guys. So it's just about being really, really clear on the language so that your customers do understand that added value that you're given. That's all I was going to say.
I think that's a point for the space industry in general. Often we're preaching to the choir, but really, if this is going to get utilised, widely and the lowest possible barrier to entry, we need to find a way to communicate it in a way that transcends that barrier, so to speak, of language. One question, again, Paul, you've been very busy on the questions here, thank you. There was a question about, and I wanted to bring in AI. Everyone, we've checked the box in terms of buzzword bingo there, but in terms of onboard processing, so as we have extra functionality happening on orbit, what risks does that present from a cyber perspective? Anything new or just an extension of stuff that's already ongoing? Any specific thoughts on that, though?
Yeah, it's quite an interesting area. So CGI, we've got our onboard software team down in Bristol. They do a great job. And it's really interesting how the sort of processing that we're doing onboard satellites has changed over time. As you've got, you're doing stuff towards the edge, or you're wanting to get stuff down, you're wanting to process things, you're wanting to limit the amount of information that you're pushing down to the ground. So there's lots of really good reasons to do more things on board. One of the interesting things about AI models themselves is the information that you need to be able to train them, and then the fact that generally speaking with AI models, you're often wanting to update them. Anytime that you're introducing something where you're needing to update something, in of itself, you're introducing new vulnerabilities into the chain. One of the things about AI models as well is it's often interesting to know what models you're using as an underlying baseline. People use a lot of internet models and understanding what they're doing. So I remember 10 years ago was the first time I was asked to present on an AI model. And I stood up and I said, here's this latest AI model that we developed, and it does this, and I'm not sure how it does this, because it was doing better than I expected. But here's my best guess as to what's happening in this neural network. But it had to be a guess, because it's very hard to reverse engineer what's happening in some of these sophisticated models. So not only you're going from a place where, with traditional onboard software, we test it to the nth degree, it's deterministic, we know exactly what's happening, we go through it with a fine-tooth comb. All of a sudden you've got effectively a black box that you're planning to update, and that maybe you're reliant on that in order to do some processing, and you'll never know if it goes wrong. If I put something on board, let's say an Earth observation satellite, and I want it to pick out, let's say, when a Russian tank has moved around, and it doesn't pick that out, one, I might not know that ever's happened, because the imagery isn't going to come back, it's just going to be processed on board, and I'll just get the alerts. And is that because of something in the supply chain? Is it because it hasn't picked up, because it's non-deterministic? You can run the same thing through an AI model 100 times, you won't get the same results. So it makes it effectively harder to secure everything, harder to determine when something's happened, and you've got more attack vectors. So yeah, it's really interesting.
sleep well, really, after that, isn't it, Simon?
Yeah, so I think just kind of follow on from what you're saying, Peter. My feeling is that with onboard processing, actually, it's a double-edged sword. So yes, it's great. We're putting more and more compute up in space. We're putting more adaptable computing up in space, and that can expose itself to potential threats, especially when you're doing over-air updates and introducing new algorithms. But it also presents an opportunity to have cyber defense on orbit and have autonomous cyber defense. You've got compute up there. You can use it. We're building autonomous cyber defense systems and models. And we're also doing autonomous red and blue teaming so that we can make sure that these things are more robust. So, yes, I think like I said, I think it's a double-edged sword. It will present opportunities. It will. It also does present a threat. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, particularly if being used to make decisions quickly against, it's going to need something quite special to be able to verify it from a cyber perspective. Yeah, okay. Sharon, did you have any thoughts? I have another question here, but go on.
I guess the one thing that's worrying me at the moment is about the data that's underpinning this and how it's learning from it, because we know that a lot of the data comes from general public and we know that it's coming from research, but we also know that universities are being attacked as well and the data has been changed in some of the research studies. So I'm really concerned about how we manage to kind of validate some of the data from the research, how we try and protect that so that when it gets to the onboard systems, then we've got some sort of confidence in what it is. But at the moment, it feels to me that it's a Wild West, and we're taking our eye off the ball, and we're kind of thinking about AI and its application in systems, and not necessarily thinking about how it's learning and the data that's underpinning it enough. So what we know so far is in terms of kind of research in this area, there's been 60 studies done globally on space cybersecurity. Predominantly they're from China and the US. We've had 10 from the UK, and it's focused on the satellite market. So can you think, if you just think about how little or the kind of low number of studies that have been done in this area, and then we start thinking about AI and the challenges we're facing, I think what we need is a lot more research and time put into this. So not really answering that question, but more about the information that's going in.
No, really useful, thank you. I've got a question here from Richard M, which is, so I'm just going to say, where does cyber end and space begin? This may help us kind of unpack it or deconstruct it from a language perspective. Any thoughts? I know that's a hard question. Thank you, Richard, wherever you are. Any thoughts? I think we could each have different opinions on this, but I'd be very interested to hear them.
I mean, I suppose maybe I'm old school, so when people say cyber, I always want to go, oh, you mean computers? Oh, no, we mean cyber security. Oh, you mean computer security? That's a completely different thing. And the reason that I think that is because any time you've got any form of compute, then you want to be thinking about the security of that. Anytime you've got anything, you want to be thinking about the security of that. So if you've got a satellite up there with any form of compute, I'm guessing most of it does. Maybe someone's got an organic satellite, they haven't told me, but then it will involve cybersecurity on board. If you've used any computers to do any designing of your satellite, probably most of them, then you're going to want to think about cybersecurity. If you've got cybersecurity in terms of how you're going to task that, if you've got any computers that you're using in terms of how you're going to interpret the data, if you've got any computers that you've used in developing your models, if you've got any computers that you've used in terms of your HR systems in order to employ the people that you're using on those systems. So effectively, any time you're using any form of computing or things that could be influenced by computing, then there should be a cybersecurity policy that is appropriate to protect that level of compute. So in some respects, any part of the space industry and segment, consider your cybersecurity aspects.
Not necessarily a separation between the two.
Yeah, I mean, space does go on for a long way, but in terms of space-based assets that the humans make, then that's probably the edge. Okay. So I think we're out of the solar system now, Voyager? Yeah, just about?
Yeah, quite possibly.
So there.
Brilliant. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, so I mean, I think probably in response to that question, I'm not sure that we want there to be a beginning and an end of one thing. I think with all businesses, whether it's space or not, cyber is completely embedded in what we do, and I think it needs to be completely embedded in what we do. And you raised a point there, and you spoke about the people that we employ. I mean, actually, one of the most likely threats that we have from cyber is an insider threat. Especially when we're talking about kind of secure networks or what are perceived to be secure networks. An insider threat is actually a real issue, and that's where somebody that you've employed intentionally does something that you don't want them to do. And so, I think absolutely we need to think about it that there isn't a beginning and end, and these things just pervade.
So it's kind of an artery of the whole, so to speak. You can't pull it out. It isn't separate. It's kind of general purpose. Maybe by calling it cyber, we're not helping ourselves. Maybe we need to think of a new word. Answers on a postcard on that one. I've got a question here from Paul Day. Should the UK set up a department like US Space Force Delta 9 that can assess a mission against a cyber threat profile, could be linked to insurance premiums for safe and sustainable space? Can you hear me okay? I know the acoustics are a bit difficult, so not just am I very interesting, but while you're leaning forward, but you also can't hear me. Should the UK set up a department like US Space Force Delta 9, so something that is a military entity to assess a mission against a cyber threat profile? Do you think that would be useful? I can have a crack at this question as well, but you guys go first.
I do, yes. I think somebody needs to, yeah, because at the moment, I think it's good for a starter for 10. I don't necessarily think it's the final solution and the right answer, but we're kind of at a stage where we're passing the buck to everyone else and nobody's really doing something because it's somebody else's job or somebody else's responsibility. And actually, we need somebody to take the bull by the horn and say, well, actually, I'm going to put my marker down and I'm going to drive this forward. So I think we definitely need some action. And if that's a good starter, then why not?
Sorry, yeah, I was just going to add to that. Actually, I think yes, because I think it would give cyber the seriousness that it needs. And I think just looking out at the crowd, this is the thinnest crowd that we've had, and it's because we're talking about cyber, and cyber's people just think it's it's not
the audience.
It's not the sexy part of space, right? It's cybersecurity, but it really, really needs to be given the gravity that, excuse the pun, that it requires.
So some kind of Star Wars or sci-fi angle. I think we were just saying earlier about the event in Cheltenham last week with was it Guardians of the Galaxy? Giving it that, bringing it to life somehow, would help.
Yeah, I mean, it's slightly controversial here. I work a lot with Space Command. Huge amount of respects for what they do. Huge amount of respects for 11 Group and Stratcom, and some of you know what I'm referring to, and some of you won't. But to be honest, what I think we do actually well in the UK is not just say it is up to the military to do stuff. And I think it's really interesting when you talk to the Americans and where they have, the military they've got over there and what they do and where things end. And you talk to Space Command in the UK and what they do and where that ends. And my larger division in CGI is Space Defence and Intelligence. And, so we talk to a number of our government customers. And one of the things that we always say we've done well in the UK in space domain awareness is work across government. And we look at UK Space Agency, CAA, and Defence working together. So we've had the NSPOC set up recently, and that is not saying, the best thing to do is just give it to the military because they have a protect and defend remit, or just give it to the Space Agency because they have a remit for civil. Actually, what you want is cross-government body that's empowered to work on space domain awareness. Now, I'm not saying NSPOC should be the natural home of cyber alerts. I'm saying that partly because I have said that in the past and been told, no, maybe it should be something else. But a cross-government body that is able to bring in the CEA, who do look at cyber threats, who do bring in the UK Space Agency, another part of DCIT, who will be able to bring in the specialists from the MOD, and who will be able to bring in our intelligence communities, and to be able to bring in academics who will be able to work on that, and to be able to bring in industry. It's such a big problem that just saying, mod, it's your problem and you can solve it, doesn't feel like the natural solution to me.
But somebody's got to take it forward.
Oh, yes, which is why I think the NSPOC and the remit of the NSPOC for space domain awareness, where their remit is to bring together UK Space Agency, CAA, MOD, academia, government, and it's the ownership within that is a good remit with ownership that brings everyone working together. And that's what I'd like to see for space cybersecurity as well.
It is equally owned, isn't it, between civil and defence and SPOC, I think, in terms of the way it's managed and number of staff and that kind of thing. Yeah, I think that's a great idea to bring the two together, because it is a dual-use issue, right? It affects everybody. So Paul also had a suggestion, Paul Day, should the UK set up a... Oh, no, sorry. Sorry, here we go. About running a Hackasat competition, which is possibly something that could be done across different agencies within the UK, which the Catapult, I'm sure, could help with as well. I'm feeling an event coming up towards the end of this year. But yes, Paul, I think that would be a fantastic idea, especially if given a real-life problem to go at, and maybe a case study could come out of that, which would be relatable for SMEs and as well as larger companies. Sharon, were you going to come in there?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, you know, we've kind of talked about the technical parts or whatnot, but I think we kind of need to think about the cyber criminals or the kind of threat actors in this space as well. I did a session recently and I asked the group to think about who's the cyber criminal that we're talking about, or who's these threat actors. And what happened was that people took their traditional views of cyber criminals and they just populated it into the discussion on space. And I was like, well, do you honestly think that the cyber criminals, given that, you know, if you can take over a space-based asset, you've got the opportunity, as President Lyndon Johnson once says, they who own space own the world. So we've got about power, we've got about financial gain because of the kind of huge money that's involved in space. Do you think that these cyber criminals or these threat actors are sitting, ticking a box, going, oh, well, I'm going to look at it in this framework, or I'm going to look at cyber tactics, and I'm going to tick that and try that today? They're not. They're being really innovative. They're pushing the technology. They're looking at the sector differently. And yet we are continually using the same lens to think about the problems in this emerging, exciting sector in an out-of-date way. So I've been kind of on this kind of bandwagon saying that we need disruption, we need innovation in cybersecurity for the space sector. And you know what? We've got lots of innovation. We've got lots of SMEs that are doing amazing stuff, but they're having a difficult time actually rising to the top to be able to get their innovation into the marketplace, because we tend to go with the primes. We tend to go with those that we know already. So we've got a lot of disruption and lots of innovation that could actually turn this issue upside down across the UK that we're not capitalising on at the moment. So I just want to make sure that we capture that we think about the cyber criminals and the threat actors differently, and we find a way that we can harness the innovation that we're all talking about, really, that we're saying that we need in, to bring that to the top so that we could become the most innovative, safe and secure and thriving space nation. Sorry, that was a statement. That was a montage.
A wonderful point, well made. I think there's a UK-specific angle here, and why is it you think that the UK in particular has got such innovation in this space?
Well, I think because we're quite innovative, we're agile, so we're quite nimble at the moment, and actually we've got a lot of opportunity to grow. We're not too far along on this journey where other nations are as well, and we've got really good connections internationally, so we can collaborate. We're not seen as a major threat, and actually, I'm going to be controversial here, but on the kind of global space sector, we're still trying to find our feet. So we're not a major player internationally really at the moment. So we've got an opportunity to set our kind of put our marker down and say, well, actually, we're going to lead in cybersecurity in the commercial space sector, or we're going to grow the most secure, safe space sector in the world, so that other nations want to collaborate and work with us. And that's a kind of proposition and a different opportunity that we could make. But that's my opinion.
No, that's great. Thank you. Any other thoughts on that?
I mean, I'm going to challenge that the UK isn't a major space player, because one of the things I look at is when you look at the countries with the most number of licensed assets, UK has consistently been in the top 5. We are probably in the top 3 right now. Yeah, the UK probably licensed more space-based assets than the rest of Europe put together. And each one of those space-based assets is vulnerable to being attacked. And then we've got a very good supply chain. We've got lots of innovation in terms of the UK, all of which builds into not just the assets that we license, but loads of assets that gets launched and loads of things that we do on the ground. So I would say that the UK, because of where we are in terms of the number of things that we build, the number of things that we license, the number of things that we help build, the number of things that we support, is actually a prime target for people who are looking to cause disruption. And the one thing I would definitely agree on is that what you need to do is we need to be innovative in terms of how we protect. And we also need to understand, we need to get the experts in to be able to say, this is how you do the protection. I mean, when I look to do, flight dynamics, I know a very little bit about it, but I won't pretend that I know enough. And I go to the people who have been doing flight dynamics for 20 years, who have got PhDs to the end and can really do these things. And we know that these things are hard, and we should give exactly the same level of respect to the people who do cybersecurity. And when I look at our pen testers and all of the things that they know how to do, I know more about software than I do about flight dynamics, but the pen testers can run rings around me, and it's not just them attacking from the side. It's we say, oh look, we've put this WAF in, or we've put these protections in. I say, oh right, that's brilliant. I'm just going to go channel straight through there because there's a vulnerability that I know about in the very software that you've put in to protect something that you don't know about. And I thought, well, great, I'm glad I went and got to you guys and told us what to do. So I think you're really right. The cyber criminals and that, they are being very, very inventive, and we need to be as professional and as more innovative in order to be able to protect them. Because it's, generally speaking, if you're trying to protect an asset, you have to protect against everything that could attack it. And if you're an attacker, you just have to find that one weak point. So
really, you're only as strong as your weakest link.
Yes,
which
definitely.
Could be anywhere.
Yes,
frankly. Okay, Simon.
Yeah, I think I was just going to pick up on a point that probably you were both saying, really, in terms of, you're saying we are an incredibly innovative country and we have some fantastic innovators. I think but there is this perception that innovation is for SMEs and production systems are for primes. And I still feel, as an SME, that there is a bit of a glass ceiling. And I think there are opportunities to work with primes, and there are opportunities to bring those things through. But I still think there is a bit of a glass ceiling that we kind of need to break through to actually really be able to see the benefit of those innovations and that money that we put a huge amount of money into innovation. But I think we just really need to be able to put the process in place that enables us to harness those innovations.
That's a really good insight. I'm just conscious of time. We're almost up against time. I just had one question to ask each of you to give your thoughts on before we finish. And in terms of, if you could pick out one thing, just one thing that would help drive us forward in terms of improving cyber in the UK or improving cybersecurity from a space perspective, what would it be? If we start with you.
I would like everyone involved in the mission to understand the cyber security related risks to that mission. And then they should either decide that they're not going to do anything about it, in which case they're going to own the risk, or they should decide, I need to find out how to mitigate the risk. As long as people are making an informed decision about the risks that they have and are choosing to own or mitigate them, then hopefully we will have very good missions going forward.
Thank you. Simon?
I think really, I think my wish is we just really need to raise the profile of cyber and the threat that it has. You know, like I said earlier, we tend to talk about space threats, we tend to talk about space domain awareness and the space industry, and we tend to talk about the sexy parts of that. And I don't think cyber's quite there yet. And I think we probably just need to be able to raise the profile and really kind of get it in front of people and just make sure, like Peter was saying, just make sure it's really built in and embedded into everything that we do.
Thank you. Sharon?
Unsurprisingly, mine is going to be about skills. We've got almost 4 million unfilled cybersecurity roles globally, and that's just in cyber. So then when we think about adding space to that, you can imagine how many jobs there is and opportunities. So I think it's about making sure that we've got a skilled workforce to be able to capitalise on some of the opportunities that is out there as well, and obviously educating executives so that we've got that kind of top-down approach as well.
Thank you. And I should also add, there's a wealth of resource from the UK Space Agency as well, both the ecosystems team and the security and resilience team. So do please take it as read that they are available to help, that's what they're here for as well. I'd like to thank all of the panellists. Thank you so much for your time. Really fascinating discussion. I think we've got some good ideas for events later in the year there. Thank you to the audience as well for some brilliant questions as well, and thanks all for listening.
The notebook's filling up. Loads of great quotes. I love the way you just keep dropping these. Cyber needs the gravity of the situation to be understood. Yeah, we love it. It was really useful. Can I just pick up on one thing that you said right at the end there? And that was about skills. The job numbers. Tell me that again. Oh.
4 million. ISC just announced the latest skills gap report, and there's 4 million globally.
4 million globally within cyber.
Within cyber, and then if you think about the gaps in space.
Yes.
So many opportunities.
And that is the way to view it. Opportunities.
Opportunities, yeah.
You're at the University of Strathclyde, but you're also doing Space University.
I teach at the International Space University in Strasbourg.
And do you feel that there's a whole range of, like, a diverse group of people who are coming through?
So I'll give you a giggle. So I teach space entrepreneurship and cybersecurity, and I've got young people coming and doing my classes that don't even get any credit for it. They just are so excited. There's not enough academics doing it, and they want to learn. So they come and they'll spend a couple of weeks in my class at the back, just listen to me drone on because they're so excited.
So the appetite, as you talked about earlier, is most definitely there.
Yeah, we've just not got enough delivery.
Right, so there is a solution there potentially. Thank you very much. There are the zones. There's an academia zone actually where we could get to grips with some of that. You guys will be out and about over these 2 days, so please go and find them. Thank you very much. Can I say to Melanie Cliff for chairing that debate? Thank you very much. As well as to Simon, to Sharon, to Peter, and coming up, what do we have here? We have a brilliant keynote for you. Dasha Filchinka of the Astro Agency. There are so many brilliant parts to this lady's story that I don't know what she's going to bring to you today on it. So we'll explore all of that. Very quick break, I think, of about 15 minutes, and then we'll be back here to hear from Dasha. Okay, see you shortly.